Have you ever felt like a flamingo in a flock of seagulls? Like you just don't fit in no matter how hard you try? In this episode, we're joined by the amazing Dr. Essence Deming-Rivers to talk about identity, belonging, and the power of curiosity. We'll explore why emotions are actually data and how to find the spaces where you truly thrive, and why giving yourself permission to experiment with who you are can change everything. If you're ready to stop forcing yourself into the wrong spaces and start embracing who you really are, this episode is for you. Let's dive in. Hi there. Welcome to the Empowered and Embodied Show. I'm Kim Romaine.
And I'm Louise Neal. We're two transformational coaches who are also fellow travelers on the path of growth and self-discovery. And we're inviting you along for the ride.
That's right. We're right here in the trenches with you, navigating the ups and downs of life. And each week we'll be sharing our own experiences, bringing you conversations with amazing guests, and exploring insights and strategies that have helped us find more clarity, confidence, and ease in our lives.
And trust us, we do not have it all figured out. We're learning and growing right alongside you.
So if you're ready to rise above the chaos, doubt, and confusion that sometimes life throws our way,
and step into a more empowered and embodied version of yourself,
then you're in the right place. Let's get started. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Empowered and Embodied Show. I am one of your co-hosts, Kim Romaine, joined as always by my other co-host.
That's me, Louise Neal. And today we are joined with a really special guest.
My name is Dr. Essence Rivers, and I'm very excited to be here.
We are so happy to have you with us today, Dr. Essence, and we will share with the world who you are and what you do in a little bit. But we want to start this week how we start every week. What are we celebrating this week? What's a celebration?
Okay, so right before our episode, I pulled out my Oracle cards, just feeling called, and I want to share because I think there's a celebration in here, and it's actually quite timely. So the card I pulled was from my Green Witches Oracle deck, which I really, really love. It's kind of new, so we're just like in the early relationship phase, me and the deck. But I pulled this card, and I thought it would be really interesting because it says snow on it. And it's so funny because I'm in the middle of a blizzard right now. But this card, the meaning, the essence behind it was about how in a snowstorm, like I just imagine like everything that gets quiet, when it's snowy. Well, since I don't know if you know, everybody in Canada knows when it gets snowy. If you've had a snowy opportunity, everything gets really quiet in a storm. The sound is just absorbed. And so I imagine this is happening right now, but this slowing down and this like being in a moment without distraction. And that's a little bit about my celebration today, is that with all of the noise and everything that's going on, is just to be able to like be in a moment just for the moment and not have anything be able to crash in on it. Just like cuddling up to my fireplace and having a cup of hot cocoa and just really being there in that space. So I guess it's presence at the end of the day is what I'm celebrating.
Very mindful,
right?
Yeah. That whole thing. So yeah, that's what I'm celebrating. And I just thought it was so cool that snow was my card.
I knew the blizzard was coming.
I can't get so. Essence, how about you? What are you celebrating today?
Oh, today I am celebrating. My wife and I are in practice together. We're both psychologists, and we love kind of working with the nonprofits in our area. And we had a meeting this morning with a nonprofit that is like so perfectly aligned with my vision and how I like to do work. And so I'm getting a lot more kind of opportunities and finding people that are looking for the kind of work that I do, which makes me feel like, sometimes you feel a little bit lost and like, am I really on the right track? Am I really, the things that I think are important, are they actually important? And then followed up from that meeting, getting to talk with you guys about something that's really important to me too. So I'm just having myself a day.
I love that. I love that. I'm with you on that. I'm just having a day. So I'm not having a blizzard here, which I'm grateful for because I'm not a fan. But I have two things that have me totally lit up right now that just happened earlier today. For the last 6 months, I've been trying to find somebody. So I moved from Chicago to Montreal 3.5 years ago. I don't have a GP, so therefore I don't have a gynecologist, but I've had this IUD in for a long time. And it has been a struggle finding somebody in the private sector here who could remove it for me, given that I'm also going through perimenopause and things are changing, right? There's some dryness. There's what they love using the word atrophy. I'm like, really? Like, it's just rude. Can we come up with another word, please?
Better.
Yeah. So, but there's stuff going on. And so I had a really bad experience about 6 months ago where a doctor was trying to take it out and she just couldn't do it. And it caused me pain and like all this stuff. And I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. How am I going to get this thing out? I happened to go find a nurse practitioner in the private sector who I just went in for just like an annual checkup. Just check me out, make sure everything's okay. And he said, we could do the pap smear and we could just do the IUD removal today too. And I was like, you know what? Sure, let's give it a whirl. And I told him the history with it. He just said, well, let's try. It was like night and day. It came with such ease. And I'm a huge proponent of ease. One, it became ease when he was like, we can just do this. And two, the process came with so much ease as well. And I was like, well, there was a little discomfort, sure. It still felt like freedom. It's like this thing has been hanging over my head and now it's just done. And so it feels freeing to have that done and to be able, so I'm celebrating that. I'm like, I got through my fear of, is this going to be the worst experience again? And am I going to be okay? And yeah, I can advocate for myself and have treatment that I deserve. And it was wonderful. And then the second thing was I got to spend an hour talking with my writing coach, and like he's encouraging me to go to all these fantastic philosophical places that I do when I get to talk like on the show and other places, but my writing isn't always as philosophical. And so he's really encouraging to pull that out of me, and I'm so excited about where that could go. So that's what I'm celebrating today. Kind of freedom on two fronts, right?
Yeah.
I love it. Love it.
That's my excitement. So before we go any further, I'm going to let the world know about you, Essence, and then we'll dive into our conversation for the day. Sound good?
Yes.
Cool. Okay, so Dr. Essence is a licensed clinical psychologist and the director of psychological services at Customized Behavioral Healthcare. As a queer, chronically ill, neurodivergent woman of color, Dr. Essence brings a unique and deeply personal perspective to her work. She is passionate about breaking down barriers of shame, stigma, and inequality, particularly for the LGBTQ plus BIPOC individuals with ADHD. She offers a range of virtual services across the U.S., including therapy, coaching, consultation, training, and public speaking. Her approach is systemic, trauma-informed, and person-centered. Focusing on the unique challenges faced by minorities, Dr. Essence is committed to facilitating healing and resilience by sharing knowledge, encouraging connection, and providing new skills, making everyone she comes into contact with feel safe, seen, and understood. Yeah.
Oh, who wrote that? That's so good.
Well, I hope you did. And I hope like you can cheer that on every day.
No, that was me. When you don't look for a while, you're like, wow.
What jumped out at you when you were listening to that?
I think that I'm in my late 20s, so I'm about to turn 29. And I feel like when I was a kid versus kind of where I am now, I always thought that like once I turned 18, I was just going to know who I was. I was just going to like have it all figured out, and I didn't like at all. And I think that it's kind of cool to watch, I went through graduate school and everything, so I've had to talk about myself for a long time. And I feel like hearing somebody read back in my words things about me that I like believe to be true is like interesting to be like, oh, like that does sound like a good description of who I feel like I am. So it just hits different when you believe it, I guess.
It's so interesting that you talked about, right, at 18, we feel like we should know who we are, and others think we should know who we are too. One of my biggest pet peeves is people asking kids, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah.
One, how the hell can you ever know what you want to be? Because you don't even know what's possible. And two, there is no way. It's funny, I was just journaling about this morning. Like, you don't know at 6 or at 12 or at 16 or at 18 or even 24 sometimes, right? Who the hell you are, let alone what you want to be doing in this world.
Yeah, I think it's a privilege to be a person that like sticks with whatever goal or whatever outcome like you thought life would look like. Um, and I guess it can be a limitation because sometimes when we put ourselves in those boxes and say like I'm gonna be this, you aren't looking around you to see like what the options were. I knew actually at 12, I think that I wanted to be a psychologist. And that's like so rare to say like I want to be this when I grow up and actually become that. And so I think that when I talk to people about like especially teenagers that I work with about what they want to do in the future, like you don't need to worry about what you want to do. Just worry about who you want to be and the rest will follow.
How do you help teenagers understand the differentiation between doing and being? Because I don't think adults even get it.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Well, I think in my life, but also in my work, I take a very like values centered approach. And I think that when you're a kid and when you're living at home with your parents, their values just become your values. You don't really have a choice. You don't get to say like, oh, mom and dad, you value, financial stability, but I don't. So stay home from work today. Like you don't really have a say. And so right around like adolescence, when a lot of teenagers start to see that what they want or how they see the world differs from their families, I encourage that. Like, okay, like let's look at like what is important to you. And then from there you can kind of talk about both of those things at the same time. Like if you value authenticity, what do you want that to look like for your life? How would that show up? In the way that you connect with yourself, the way that you connect with others, but also what would your actions do? What do you need from yourself and from your relationships in order to be able to practice that value? Because I think that a lot of times we are like, oh, this is important to me. But if we don't connect the thing that's important to us to ourselves or to our actions, then it just is like this thing that exists out there, but doesn't really land.
Yeah. Repeat when you're 30, 40, 50.
Right.
Right? Because it's not just like when we're trying to find out who we are separate from our parental units or our, how we were brought up and that journey, we can get lost so often over and over again throughout our lives because we can find ourselves in situations, in communities, surrounded by people who, the word is ooze, but like we pick up on that, right? And we lose ourselves often over and over again. Like, help me? Like, how do we get that compass or how do we keep going?
I think that it's like I grew up in like the evangelical Christian sphere of things. And I think as much as religion is its own thing, I think that in the US anyway, like it is kind of permeated through like the cultural expectations that people face. I think that one of the things that I was taught from a young age is that like there are these principles in the Bible and we need to stay on them and we need to be this. And I don't think that that approach of like consistency in your identity is always helpful. I think that it was very freeing for me in like my life, my relationships, my faith, everything, to give myself permission to not be consistent. And when I took off like the pressure to say like I have to feel the same way about the same stuff all the time, it gave me permission to like ask more questions. So I can say like what's most important to me today? What's most important in this relationship and kind of moving in and out So I don't know that the answer is necessarily like be this like rock solid thing that is never morphed by your environment. It might be the opposite, which is like go with where you're at and make it a practice to check in with yourself and find the words and like find the direction that makes the most sense to you moment to moment, instead of deciding at 8 years old, this is who I'm going to be, and then being stuck with that plan.
Two things come to mind when you're talking. One is, and I did not grow up Amish, so if there are any former Amish individuals that are listening, probably not current. This is not coming from personal experience. This is just coming from like my understanding. But it's this place of like Rumspraga, right? It's like go out and find yourself. Like, you have the freedom at this age, and that in that culture, it's that age. But I feel like all of it, the second word that came to mind, so the first word that came to mind when you were talking was Rumspraga. It was like, go out and find yourself. The second word was experiment. Right? If we don't allow ourselves the opportunity to experiment with self, right? With our values, try it on, with our ethos, with our philosophy. If we don't give ourselves that opportunity or be in an environment where it's safe to experiment, then how can we ever truly know who we are as individuals?
Yeah. I think you're nailing it. And at least in the way that like I see the world is like in the scientific method. If we think about like, if I say that, I don't know, you drink this Gatorade and it's going to do XYZ for you. If I just accepted that as fact and like went on telling everybody, oh, drink Gatorade, it does this, but I never actually like tried to see if it worked for me, people would call that irresponsible or lying or like misrepresenting. So then why am I deciding like, oh, this is what works for me, and never reevaluating to see if that's actually the case? It's unfair to ourselves. So I think once you get over like the individual limitations of like telling yourself all the things that you should be or should do or whatever, and allow yourself to experiment, that's not like the end. And I think it stuck out when you talked about like the environment, a safe environment to do that. And I think that's where a lot of the work that I do and a lot of like the people that I work with, that's like the biggest barrier is like we do a lot of work on yourself to get you there. But then you have to look at, okay, is this a safe place for me to actually try these things on? And that's a concern that a lot of teenagers that I see have is like, oh, okay, like maybe you're questioning your gender identity, expression, sexuality, whatever, but your parents are not going to be a safe place for you. It is not helpful for me to be like, well, just do it anyway. Go ahead. Like, try it out, see what happens. Like, that is actively putting people in like bad situations. And so I think that if we have the like identity, express yourself conversation without the nuance of the social and like societal side of things, then we end up putting people at more harm and making them say, I'm never doing that again. That was terrible.
So how do we find places where we can try these different things on? Because that can be really tough.
I think that there's a lot of, I think this is a very like individual kind of question, because like there's so many things that like I've found that I have access to in my life that I'll maybe suggest for a friend or for a client that they don't have access to. And so there's not like a one size fits all approach, because some of us are just, we have more access to resources that make that safe, depending on like where you live or how much money you have, what your job is, if you have kids. Like there's so many identity factors that distinguish that. But I think a really good one might be paying attention to how you feel about you in different situations. And if you go into, I don't know, like let's say you get coffee with a friend, and when you leave, you feel worse about yourself, or you feel like you're overanalyzing every single thing that you said, or you feel really tired and drained, then we can kind of tell by like the fruit of that interaction that maybe that wasn't great for you. But you go into an environment and you feel energized and you feel more yourself and you feel excited and like hopeful and those kinds of things. And that's probably a good environment for you, or a good practice for you because it's making you feel more grounded and more you, not less.
So what I'm hearing there is having the access of self, of awareness of self, to know what feels good and what doesn't feel good. And I know, right? So I don't work with a lot of teenagers. I've worked with a few, but most of the people that I work with are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And they find it hard to access the wisdom that is in their body, right? How do I feel?
Mm-hmm.
That is in our body. That is not in our brain. We think it's in our brain, but it's in our body. How do I feel when I'm with this person or when I'm in this environment? How do you start to work with folks when maybe that doesn't come as easily to them?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different, the way that I see things is like there are strategies and there are skills. So strategies are things that like you just pull out because there's a problem and like you use them. But then skills are things like you either have it or you don't, but you can improve them. And I think emotional identification is a skill. So if you're not used to doing it, then you're not going to be able to do it. In the first, second, third, 50th time you do it, it might be a little rough. But once you got it, you got it. And so I think that there's this app that I'm like obsessed with. It's a free app. I think you have to consent to like participate in research or something, but I like the project. So I do. And it's called How We Feel. And basically when you like log into the app, it has 4 categories based on if the emotion or like the way you're feeling is more pleasant or more unpleasant, and if it's more energy or like lower energy. And then you can kind of click on that quadrant and they'll give you all of those emotional terms. And there's definitions right there. And so that's like one of the first things that I always give people is like, I want you to track your emotions. And I want you to track your emotions, not just when they're really big, like not when you're really angry or really sad, but pick 2 times a day. A lot of people that I work with have ADHD. So I say like, you need to put it with something that you're going to do every day. So like brushing your teeth. So when I brush my teeth, I'm going to check in. And when I brush my teeth at night, I'm going to check in. So that you have like, it's not influenced by your emotions. It's just kind of a good picture of how you feel. And this app is just the coolest thing ever. I promise I'm not sponsored, but if they're listening, I'm open to it.
I was going to say, don't deny that. Like, welcome that in.
Wow, like, to talk about feelings. But one of the things I think is really cool is that it also gives you the opportunity to track, like, who were you with? Or where were you? Or what were you doing? And I think that this is always so eye-opening for people to see that, like, okay, every time I go see my friend, I don't know, Brenda, I'm anxious and angry. Okay, maybe Brenda's not the one to be hanging out with. And so I don't think that we have to overcomplicate it. I think when we get in the practice of sitting with ourselves, checking in and saying, like, how do I feel? And then being able to do that over and over and over again in different situations, the rest kind of fills in for you. So you just have to be willing to like be bad at something for a little bit in order for it to like get good.
I am definitely checking out that app. I was so excited this year for the holidays. My family gave me a feelings wheel pillow.
Love that.
I use it with my clients, but I love it also with our daughter because, right, and even my husband, because people think we have like 6 emotions. And I'm like, try lots more than that.
There's so many.
It's huge. And to be able to start to identify what you're feeling and the nuances of those feelings. And I love that it pings you to do it not based on the high or the low, right? That extreme that you might be in, but to have this place of it's just what I'm checking. So I start to normalize feeling, because I come from it with my work. Very often I start literally in the body from a somatic perspective. Right? I'm like, what is the actual sensation? Like, we can name the feeling later, but what is the sensation? And what I have them do is track, like, breakfast, lunch, dinner, like whatever, like the same thing. Find 3 anchor points throughout the day and just say, what is the physical sensation that I'm having? Just so you can open up the dialogue that something is happening.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a creator, and I hate that I don't remember her name. So we'll give credit in a second. But she came up with like the emotion sensation wheel. And I use that a lot because it helps you to identify based on like the body sensations that you're feeling, not just the words, because people feel them differently. And there's so many components to our emotions on like identifying what they are. So sometimes it might be how you're thinking and how much control you have over what your thoughts are doing. Sometimes it's your body sensations. Other times it is how you're communicating or not communicating. So I think in order for us to really show up and find environments that we belong in, we kind of have to know like how to gauge those things. And I think that is one of the main functions of emotions, is to let us know kind of like a status update of how things are going. And if you're feeling bad, then maybe things need to change. And if you're feeling good, then you know what to do with that information.
And so I'm seeing Lindsay Brayman. Is that who?
That's the one. She's just so cool. Yes, that's it.
Cool. We will include that in the show notes, as well as the How We Feel app, because I think giving people tools like this so that they can have, because we depend so much on our brains, our cognition, and our language.
Mm-hmm.
And yet these sensations, these feelings that we have, both the sensation of the feeling and the emotion of the feeling, are really hard to bring into cognition and language. Right. And so having tools, I know visualization is another way, right? It's like allowing that to have its own form, versus trying to use a concrete term to say, I feel aggravated, which is different to me than frustrated, which is different to me than angry. It's like all of that. And to say, I feel like I have this boiling up of lava that wants to overflow. Fantastic. Like, we can imagine what that, right? And if I'm feeling that when I'm in this space, like you said, probably not the space that I want to start playing with how I identify myself, or what aspects of my values or my ethos I want to bring forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah. As you're talking, it's like, I hope every client of mine hears this episode when they're struggling with like, am I doing the right thing in my career? Am I in the right place? And it's like, whoa, like, this is it. This is how you discover if you are in the right place or not. Because it's a slowing down, and it's a intentional like pause or break in the busyness that is our work lives sometimes, to say, how am I feeling? I even, folks sometimes can't even articulate how they're feeling. I say, give it a color. Like, what's the color right now? Or what's, like, if you put an emoji on it, what is that? Like, just pause for a moment, slow down, and like, touch back into who you are, instead of getting caught up in this busyness. Because I get to people, or people come to me when they've been on that hamster wheel and they haven't been paying attention for so long to how that environment makes them feel, or how those people make them feel, or how that task makes them feel. And so it is a slowing down, and somehow, however you can do it, to start to put a structure around it, or a word, a color, a feeling, even a temperature, whatever resource you have at that moment. How can you now start distinguishing this from that, when this feels good and that doesn't? Or, right, we need to be able to slow down to be able to access that.
You're leaning into your card from earlier today.
Totally,
Really?
right?
It does align. I remember when I was in grad school, I took a class on something called DBT, and mindfulness is a really big component of that. And then there's also like emotion regulation. And my professor, don't quote me because this could be the wrong statistic, but said something like 80% of emotion regulation is just being able to identify and describe how you're feeling. So like, as soon as you are able to say like, okay, I feel blank because blank, the distress like drops almost like, 80%. That's a lot. And so I think that when people are like, well, I don't know how to do that, I'm like, okay, well, like, we have to learn this. This is like the fastest way for you to have more control over your emotions, and also to make sure that your response is accurate. Like excitement and anxiety are like low key the same body sensations. It's just like a little bit different in terms of cognition. And so if I went around and there's like a bear behind me and my body's saying I'm anxious, but I interpret that as like excitement, I'm getting eaten. Like, and so this isn't a thing that we can afford to ignore. But I think that it is hard, and a lot of people feel like there's, for some reason, like a logical thought process is like superior to emotions. And I don't agree. I think that they're both there for a reason. And I always tell people, like, emotions are data. They are data. That's it. There's not bad or wrong, like bad, wrong. You shouldn't be feeling that way. Like, it's just information. And if we decide to like hope for the best and cover our eyes and not look at the data that's right in front of us, we make bad decisions because it's not aligned with what reality is showing us.
Why do you think so many people are anti discussion around feelings? Like, we shouldn't talk. I mean, part of me goes to this idea of, right, you were talking about growing up in an evangelical environment. And like the United States, where I was born and raised, is a puritanical, like the formation of the country was puritanical. So part of me feels like it's that, but I'm curious what the two of you think in terms of like, why do we think that people shut this down so quickly? We can't talk about it. We have to manage. And I mean, when they say manage, like manhandle our emotions and like shut it down. Don't talk about it.
I think, well, I'm sure there's a number of things that contribute to why that's the case. I think that some that I've seen is, especially when you're like different or you see the world different or your experiences are different, you can find yourself in situations where everybody seems to be experiencing something one way and you're not. And I think that sometimes emotions can be divisive if we are not comfortable honoring differing perspectives. Like, we feel very black and white, like it has to be this or it has to be that. So this, either you have to be happy about this or sad about this. And we don't create room for like diversity of reactions or emotions. And I think that a lot of people, just different comes with fear or comes with like, I need to classify this, I need to make sense of this, rather than just like letting things exist as they are. So I think like that is one component of it is just feeling like it has to match or it has to align or we have to be on the same page. I think the other thing is that people sometimes forget or fail to distinguish the difference between your emotions and your actions. And thoughts as well, but especially emotions. And like a lot of people will be like, well, if I'm sad, I can't do this. And truthfully, you could do most things with a bad attitude. Like, I can go on a stupid mental health walk in the worst mood of my life. I can do that. I don't have to be in a good mood. It's not like a requirement. I can go and sit with my loved ones and be so sad and depressed and like wish that I was in bed and still be there at the same time. They feel like opposites, but they're not. Our emotions do not disqualify us from any action unless we allow that to happen. Maybe not allow isn't the right word, but like if we get into the place where we can recognize like, I feel this way and my actions that would align most with my values to take in this moment is this, then our emotions aren't a threat to what we do. And I think that makes them easier, is that I know that I'm not going to lose control just because I let my emotions exist. And I think a lot of people have that fear that if they let themselves feel, they're no longer going to be able to like have agency over what they do. And I don't really know where that comes from, but it's not true.
I sort of feel like they're tied together. This idea of the fear of diversity, which we're talking about emotions, but like that's people.
That's the word, yes.
People, anything that is remotely quote unquote different, they're terrified of and therefore push away as hard as they can. Like that feels to be and I know it's not the norm. Like I'm seeing that people have evolved beyond that. But there is this almost innate desire to push away anything that's different. And therefore, those of us that experience anything either in our intersectionality or and emotionally or thought, whatever it is, where we feel like the one that's othered or different, we very often pull ourselves back, I think. Right. So that sounds like it also leads itself to kind of the second point that you made, right? Of creating almost a shutdown unless we allow ourselves to be in that experience.
Yeah, it's the word that comes to mind as you both are talking is this desire to feel like we belong. And when we're in a place that that's what we see, that's modeled by our community, our parents, our social circles, then it's easy to, I don't want to say it's easy, but it feels like that's what we need to do to survive because we just want to belong. We can be in the entirely, I'm going to use air quotes here, we can be in the wrong community or the wrong situation, yet we still feel like we need to belong because that's what we see and that's what we know. Our worlds are really small, even with technology and how large our world has become or how accessible other places in the world have become. I still believe that we only interact very closely with those who are close knit to us. And when we have the wrong people, and I say that with air quotes again, in that circle, then that shuts us down, right? Because we feel deeply, and maybe it's anthropology, it comes from anthropology, right? Like our genetics are like, ooh, we need to survive here. So I can't stand out. I'll be hurt. And so we shut down instead of looking for another community or looking for a place where we get to be ourselves. We shut down. And that's the systems that we're brought up in, right? A lot of times.
Well, I think like it is natural. And I did some research on this when I was looking at kind of relationships and found what I expected to find, which is that most people enter into relationships with people that are similar to them and most demographic features. And that is rooted in kind of how the rest of nature operates. But I went to this garden one time and there was a sign and it was talking about how like the most successful, most like productive ecosystems work with diversity, like having a bunch of different things that do different things and kind of help everything like operate. And so I think that being able to be aware of that our tendency is going to be when there is something that's new, that we are not familiar with, that we don't understand, like it's going to be tempting to like pull back. And we have to make that intentional step to be curious. And like that is how ecosystems and like relationships and communities thrive, by leaning into the different, especially when it's uncomfortable, because that's just a part of the process. Like that's not the end goal. The end goal is a thriving community. That's just like in the middle from I'm going to do my own thing to I'm going to be a part of this.
I have this image of a flamingo in a flock of seagulls. Like if you show up and you're the flamingo in the flock of seagulls, it's okay because you don't know which of those seagulls wants to be a flamingo or wants to be pink and a right. It's like we don't know. So we have that, but that comes back to that place of safety. And we're talking about safety and community. Doesn't that start with safety within ourselves?
I think you have to have some level of knowing what it feels like to be at peace, to have like a baseline to compare things to. I also think, I don't know where I was talking to somebody. Somebody was telling me that they had gone on a cruise, like one of those like Disney cruises. And there was a person that like self-identified as having autism that was able to play every single Disney song. Just like if somebody was like, oh, can you play this? They could just like whip it out. And they were able to like do that for like all these different trivias and that kind of thing. And we talked about the importance of like finding a community that fits with like this talents and the giftings and things like that that you possess. Because that same individual, let's say that we moved him from working on the Disney cruise to working at the zoo. All of the strengths and all the positive things that he can do, like that is such a cool talent, and it's useless at the zoo. The zoo doesn't need that. They don't care. So if we put that person in the zoo, they're going to be like, okay, like you need to be doing these things. We don't care about your music, like superhuman ability. We just want you to like take care of the animals. And I think that there are so many of us that grow up in environments like that, where like it's not that there's anything wrong with us. And oftentimes there's nothing wrong with that environment, but there is a huge problem when your environment does not fit where you would thrive and like what would do well. And I think that if we moved away from those evaluative, like these are good people and bad people, and we're able to evaluate things on the basis of like, is this a good fit for me? Then we would, one, not be as judgmental when people leave things that just like don't vibe with who they are or what they need. But we would also have a lot more freedom to be fluid and like moving from thing to thing as we evolve, grow, and change.
I know Louise is like so lit up by what you just said from a career perspective, right? Because that's what you help people do that.
Yeah, I got goosebumps when you were talking, Essence, because if we could only start to see that experimental, right? That curiosity without judgment, and like, how do I experiment? How do I go here and see if that fits me? If it feels good. If it doesn't, that's okay, right? Go to the next thing. What are you learning about yourself as you go? I think about that Disney cruise and how to even get connected to being in an environment like that means you got to sometimes leave your shell. You got to leave your room. You got to get out there and see, so that you can feel, you can test, you can evaluate to say, is this for me? And that comes from inside us. That's not, right? That external, we often wait for that external validation to come, and it doesn't come. It comes from
A lot of people
inside.
will hide it. Like, so they might be like, you know, if same example, we have a music amazing person at the zoo. Nobody's asking you about that skill set. So you have to like, what, just like randomly break out in song and display like your skill set. And like, it just that doesn't happen. And I noticed this shift over the last year. I go to a church that is like super affirming and inclusive. It's been like a very cool experience to be in that same environment that I grew up in, and a lot of my socialization existed in, where the pastor there, his name is Dan, talks a lot about how our role in life is to help people to achieve like the best version of themselves. And I noticed over the past, like since I've been attending, a change in me like comparing myself to other people and like really just appreciating each person and what they have to offer. And it wasn't something that I did intentionally. It just kind of happened as a part of being in that community. But I've been able to like get to know my friends based on what they see as their best characteristics and traits, and like what they think is important. And like, I'm genuinely just like in awe of the people that are in my life. Especially, it gives you a lot of time to appreciate others when you're not thinking about them as a reflection of like you and am I good enough or am I whatever. And so I think that when we're looking at environments, we have to find people or situations where we're able to feel confident to like talk about what is important to us and like talk about what we enjoy once we know that. Because if you keep all of the things that you're really good at inside, you're never really going to find people that are able to even see how that would fit into the bigger puzzle. I think it requires a level of like brave vulnerability also to find a place that you belong, because you don't walk into a room and belong there, right? Like it's a process. You have to like be brave a little bit.
So what I'm hearing is it's the seagull, the flamingo, the zebra, the monkeys, the whatever at the watering hole that feel in themselves enough courage to be vulnerable in a space that is diverse, so that we can each bring our own unique wisdom, medicine, brilliance to that space.
Yeah, then nobody misses out. Like we start to fill in the gaps for one another on where one person falls short, another person's great at it. And I think that was my parents are, my dad's Black and my mom's white, and I grew up in an interracial household. And I thought that every house was like mine. Like I thought every family was like mine, and people had like the one side of their family that was one way and the other side of their family was another way. Like I had no clue until I like started going to school and I grew up and I started to see like, oh, in most places, everybody kind of is generally like the same. And they don't have conversations about like, how do we adjust our behavior, or how do we adjust our approach, or how are things done differently? We're the same family, but when we go in one environment, what parts of us does that bring out versus another environment? And like, it was just the norm for me, not necessarily to like code switch because we were being authentic, but it was okay and normal for me that in environments, I'm looking for what parts of me connect to different parts of you. And that's what I'm going to let come through. I'm not super focused on like 100% of me making sense to 100% of this other person, because I've at the intersections that I never have met another person besides my siblings that like remotely check the same boxes that I do. And so I guess that was a pretty easy thing to like get over because it never happened. But then like learning, okay, if you're not going to align 100% with people, you can either say like, okay, I don't fit in anywhere and I'm just going to be like alone, or you can get brave and be resilient and bounce back on all the times that you go to places where people can't see the value. But eventually, I hope that everybody is able to kind of stumble upon a place that you're like, wow, okay, like this makes sense. And this is like my people. And I feel very like safe and secure to like try this out. And I think it's important for us to talk about those too, for people that are in environments that aren't safe, so that they know it exists and they know it's possible for them.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at is the difference between really being in a homogenous environment, right, where there's the appearance that everybody's the same, because the reality is not a single person on this planet is the same as any other person on this planet. None.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Even though you and your siblings had some similarities and could tick all those boxes, you're also all different.
Mm-hmm.
So, and had your own unique experiences.
And what a disservice do we do to ourselves and others if we decide to like lump them in and take out all the complexities and the uniqueness that like make them who they are and say like, oh, you go in this box. You miss out on so much if you do that in like your own life, and finding like all the different things that make you. And also in relationships, if you are only looking for or accepting or displaying certain aspects of yourself, then your experience could have just been so much better.
We want to be understood, and we want to belong, and we want to be seen, and we want to be heard. But that doesn't mean that the person receiving us has to be a carbon copy of us.
Mm-mm.
It's so much better when it's not.
They just have to be willing to like take that and not try and make. I think people are messy. We are messy. And like, I think that if you're okay with being messy, it like frees you up from a lot of stuff. But I think that once you're like, okay, yeah, I'm a mess. There's a lot going on. I have a lot of like contradictions and like, this is just me. And the other person's like, okay, that's fine. Then you don't have to like try to clean it up. You just exist. And I think like I had gone through so many like evaluative, rigid environments, graduate school, the church, being like a Black woman in higher education, like all of these things where people are always looking at me and comparing me to some standard, that I was like, fuck this. Like, I'm done. I'm not going in any environments like that anymore. And in the pursuit of only going into places where I felt like I could just be, is where I found the community that was a bunch of other people trying to do that. So if you trust your gut and you just like really like lean in and say like, I'm only going to go places that feel good to me. And like, obviously there's a level of privilege in that and nuance and everything. But like for the things that we can control, if you seek out what feels good to you, then eventually you're going to find your people and you're going to find your place in the world that doesn't require you to do anything except show up.
Taking us full circle. Full circle. Love it. Beautiful mic drop moment.
Love it.
So what if we were going to like underline or circle or highlight with a lot of neon lights, the things that we want to make sure people take away from our conversation today? What are those things?
I think some of the biggest things is that like not everything needs to be cleaned up and made sense of in a way that's like perfect. So when we were talking about like emotions, it's okay for you to say, wow, I'm feeling a lot of stuff and I don't know what it is, but like this is how it feels. Like that's fine. You don't have to put a perfect label on it. You don't have to put you don't need to make sense of it and make this huge argument for why you feel that way. Like let things just exist and we don't have to clean everything up. We can just kind of use that as data to understand things. I think being brave to ask questions, even when they're hard, and like listening to the answers. So asking yourself like, okay, I've worked at this job for 45 years, but like, is it still serving me? And like listening and deciding like, is this actually the case or is this just like a habit that I formed? And then recognizing that the discomfort that comes with like leaving certain environments or like speaking up or having to be vulnerable is just a part of the process. It's not the end goal. Nobody would do anything hard if that's it. Like if I knew that I was going to move across the country and like it was just going to stay isolated and I was going to be lonely and I was never going to find any friends, why would I do that in the first place? Right. But that's just like step one towards the goal. And so I think allowing ourselves to recognize that like we're always in a process. It's always a mess. And the thing that you need to figure out if it's right for you, you already have. You just have to listen. Things become a lot easier.
Louise, what do you want to make sure people hear?
I think for me, this whole conversation, we've peppered through our talk today, is this permission to be curious, I think is what it boils down to. When you're curious about yourself, about your emotions, your feelings, your community, all of those things, I think that curiosity is absolutely a superpower. And to allow yourself the permission to be curious. If something doesn't feel right, be curious about that. If something feels good, be curious about that. Just be curious about other people, about yourselves, and about your surroundings, because that will give you, I love that you said data, that will give you data. And then you can, you're just so much richer and you're more resourced when you're curious. So that's what stood out for me. How about you, Kim? What stands out for you?
I keep coming back to, because we touched on it in a lot of different ways, of the importance of being in a diverse ecosystem and allowing ourselves to be in diverse ecosystems to see ourselves more clearly. Like that was something that maybe wasn't fully explicitly said, but I really felt was kind of under the surface there. And that just keeps, that's something that I want to have people playing with a little bit, is like, look at your ecosystem. Does it feel homogenous? And if it does, where's there some opportunity to step into a little bit more diverse ecosystem to see what changes in you?
Mm-hmm.
Who knows? Maybe you're that flamingo. Like, right?
Yeah, I think it's okay to be different. And I think that even if you are feeling like you're a part of an aligned community that like is maybe similar to you, but like you feel good, maybe looking around to see like, okay, are there things that I'm not getting to do? Or are there things that I've been curious about? Like I'm safe, things are chill and stable. Okay, are there ways that you want to shake it up? because that enriches your life. Like, how could it be better? And I think things can always get better.
Yeah. And experiments are awesome. They're just an experiment.
Yeah, science.
Yeah. So Essence, where can people find you in the world? And do you have anything coming up that you might want to share with them?
Yeah, so I am on like Psychology Today. If people are looking for therapists, you can just kind of type in Dr. Essence Deming-Rivers and you will find me. That way I'm on social media at Dr. Essence Rivers. And I think at the time that this comes out, I'm hoping to have some more like group opportunities and workshops and kind of hands-on places that people can come and kind of have conversations about some of these things, and hopefully a workbook or two that can help people to like self-guide through some of these questions that maybe if you don't have a space where you can talk about this with like your peers, that you can still do some of this work on your identity and like who you are and what you want and your values independently, so that when you are in a position to do something different, you're not starting from scratch.
I love that. And we will include any of those resources that we can in the show notes as well. Beautiful. Thank you so much for being with us today. It has been an absolute joy talking with you.
Yes, it's been fun.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
And that's all for this week's episode of the Empowered and Embodied Show. We hope today's episode has sparked something within you. Remember, we're all on this journey together. If something did resonate with you today, why not share it with a friend who might need to hear it too? You can find us everywhere you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're feeling generous, leave a review. Your feedback not only helps others find the show, but also helps us understand what's most valuable to you. Until next time, be kind to yourself, stay curious, and remember, we're walking right alongside you. Thanks for being part of our community.